Hi everyone, here's the Bookchemist once again. Today I'm reviewing the new annotated HP Lovecraft, edited by Klinger, written by none else than Howard himself, and the new annotated HP Lovecraft, which came out last year and offers the same kind of insight and the same kind of critical support that the new one already did, but does it to a selection of 25 more stories that were excluded from the first volume. I'll be speaking about this one, the original one, first. Recently I filmed a few ranty videos about HP Lovecraft collections and about my frustration at the fact that I'm not quite happy with any anthology/collection out there. I think none really nails a good selection of stories that would provide a good introduction to Lovecraft neophytes, but at the same time would be a good selection to carry with you on a holiday if you are a hardcore Lovecraftian. I must confess that the new annotated HP Lovecraft, for all that it's not the kind of book you want to bring on a holiday because it's a coffin, it presents possibly the best selection of short stories I've seen in any anthology out there. It focuses on the Cthulhu mythos stories, and especially on stories revolving around the city of Arkham, the fictional city of Arkham. It starts with Dagon, as all collections should be, moves sweetly to the Statement of Randolph Carter, which is a story I never really appreciated too much, but that I reconsidered recently thanks to an amazing song called You Fool, Warren is Dead by the Darkest of the Hillside Thickets, a band I adore. If you are Lovecraft fans, you must check the band out. I'm going to put links everywhere to their stuff. And the collection then continues to a selection of Lovecraft's best. But what makes this edition, that's as large and heavy as an adult cat, different from those other editions apart from the selection? It contains an introduction by Alan Moore. It's a 4-page introduction that you might want to check out in the bookstore even if you're not buying the whole thing. Sorry, publisher. I think it provides Moore's perspective on Lovecraft, which is wonderful. I don't think it tells you anything you don't know if you're a Lovecraft fan, but still. And it contains a wonderful, amazing foreword by Klinger that's very informative, that gives you an amazing overview of the history of supernatural and horror, gothic, weird narratives up to Lovecraft's times. The foreword contains a very nice condensed biography of Lovecraft that gives you the crucial facts of his life. As we all know, Lovecraft didn't live the most exciting life in conventional terms. He wasn't quite Jack Kerouac or Melville, but at the same time there's this, it dispels a little bit, I hope it does at least, this idea that he was just a recluse who never left his room, which he wasn't. It's more complicated than that, and it provides a similarly brief but wonderfully condensed overview of Lovecraft criticism from the last few decades. I don't think you finish reading the annotated HP Lovecraft with a good sense of where you should move next if you're interested in his criticism, other than, well, you should read I Am Providence by Joshi, his final immense biography, because you must if you're a Lovecraft fan. I adore that book to no end. But still, at least you get a selection, you get a sense of who the main Lovecraft scholars are. There's a bibliography at the end, which includes all the texts Klinger consulted while preparing this annotated edition. And if you're not a scholar, if you're not going to read 10 tomes of Lovecraftian analysis and close reading, at least you get a good sense of who the people who actually do, who they are, what the Lovecraft scholars have been up to in the decades since he died, and in the decades especially since he was rediscovered by critics and the audience at large. But what about the book's key asset, the notes? What about these notes that tell you everything you need to know about all the obscure references that Lovecraft loved to spread across his short stories? The notes overall are hit and miss, but that's fine. Critical notes always are. Sometimes critics go too granular or too Captain Obvious. I recently read White Sargasso Seas and review it on the channel, and there is literally an end note there that explains what a cockroach is. Really? Who doesn't know that? But that's inevitable again. It's very difficult to calibrate your notes and how obscure or specific they should be based on a general, non-existing reader. I said that Lovecraft liked to put obscure details in his stories. That's not quite true. What Lovecraft liked to do, as any proper gentleman writer likes to, is to flaunt his scholarly nature a little bit and reference classical scholars or masters of weird and gothic fiction in his stories, and well, assume that the reader would be familiar with those references. Or the other thing he liked to do was to be very precise. Lovecraft really believed that your story should be as realist as possible, except for the one bit where realism collapses and tentacles start to appear. And one of the ways in which he was a strict realist was by having his facts straight when it comes to astronomy, to the movements of planets and stars in the sky, when it comes to topography. His stories set in Providence and his stories set in Boston, in the rest of New England, in real locations, tend to be very careful of the geography of the events. And oh my god, the case of Charles Dexter Ward in here features many more notes about the actual location of Providence houses and mansions, many more than anybody, except for somebody who was thinking about moving to 1920s Providence, can possibly need. It was so very boring to read about all that stuff. But other than that, I must confess, Leslie Klinger's notes, I've been such a bastard to the edition so far. Other than that, Klinger's notes are very informative, very enlightening. Sometimes they give you that snippet of information that puts a certain paragraph under a different light. Sometimes they actually allow you to enjoy the story more deeply. And moreover, they give you the kind of support that you get when you're studying a text like this, say in a classroom environment with a professor who knows their shit. The great pleasure, I think, of reading the Annotated HP Lovecraft, and the reason why I think any Lovecraft fan out there would love the experience, is that it feels like rereading your favorites alongside a friend, alongside another Lovecraft enthusiast, and you are sharing this experience, and you are experiencing some of the more beautiful or unforgettable passages. Again, my favorite thing about the notes is that sometimes Klinger kind of plays a game of pretending to believe the factual elements that Lovecraft is giving to the reader, and he pretends to believe about the existence of the Cthulhu cult, and sometimes he just points out to some of the most silly inconsistencies in the narrative and points out plot holes in a very tongue-in-cheek manner. It's a very enjoyable experience, and I thoroughly appreciated the new Annotated HP Lovecraft and having Leslie Klinger by my side as I navigated again through some old favorites. I think when I talked about reading with the notes, I mentioned this idea of rereading old favorites. That's because I believe that this is more an edition for fans who want to, again, experience these tales and you maybe go a bit deeper into Lovecraftian scholarship, but who maybe are not actual scholars by profession, who are already going to be familiar with all of this data because they've read Joshi and they've read Peter Cannon and they've read the other big Lovecraft names. That leaves a target audience that's not narrow at all, and if you know a Lovecraft fan, this would be an awesome present for them. I should also mention that it's a beautifully illustrated edition. There are color pictures of locations from Providence and Boston, artist impressions of some of Lovecraft's creatures, posters from movie adaptations of some of his stories, pictures of Lovecraft himself and his collaborators. It's a veritable treasure chest. But what about the second volume of Annotated Lovecraft Stories, Beyond Arkham? This one features an introduction by Victor LaValle, who's the author of The Ballad of Black Tom, which I understand to be a sort of rewriting of the horror at Red Hook. I've always wanted to read LaValle's Ballad of Black Tom. I will definitely do it sometime in the future. The selection here is wonderful, and I love this selection again, and I feel like because I love some of Lovecraft's supposedly minor stories even more than many of his mainstream ones. Stories like The Doom That Came to Sarnath, The Temple, are really among my very, very favorite Lovecraft stories. I probably had more fun with the second volume than with the first, and the second volume has the most beautiful cover I have ever witnessed. I mean, look at it. It is hands down the most beautiful book I own in my collection, period. On the one hand, for some readers it might not make sense to own this book without the first one, because this book does feature a foreword by Klinger where he talks about the evolution of Lovecraftian appreciation and some other topics it didn't deal with in the first volume, but overall, in terms of the paratextual notes and again all of those useful things in the foreword, you don't really get them in here. This is more of a compendium to the first volume. But on the other hand, if you don't care about that stuff too much, if you're only looking at the stories, then I highly encourage you to check out the table of contents of Beyond Arkham, because again, this contains many of Lovecraft's supposedly minor stories, The Tomb, The Lurking Fear, here illustrated by Clark Ashton Smith's original drawings for the story's original publication. And I feel like if you haven't read these stories and if you'd like to own them in a physical format, this is a truly beautiful book, and Lovecraft fans are going to love it. And I mean, there's no rule out there why you can't get this one and see if you enjoy the notes and the tone of the conversation and reading alongside Leslie. And if you enjoy it enough, you can always go back and get the first volume too. And I cannot stress enough how beautiful the book is. Highly recommended too. What do you guys think about the new annotated H.P. Lovecraft, either volume? I look forward to discussing it with you. My Lovecraft videos always get very interesting comments, and I'd love to see if you appreciate Leslie Klinger's companionship or not. Thanks so much to Norton for my review copy of Beyond Arkham, and thank you guys for watching the videos. Don't forget to leave a comment if you're interested in discussing this stuff, and bye guys.